Hey friends, hey besties, welcome back to my channel. I really hope you're all doing good. So as you can see from the title of today's video, I'm coming at you with a September reading wrap up, and spoiler alert, I had the worst reading month ever last month. Like ever. And the worst part of it was that I thought my August reading had been bad, right? And the whole way through September I was like, oh, I'm doing so much better than last month, like I'm loving this, I'm doing such a great job, this is a great reading month. And then I added up how many books I read in the month of September and I was like, actually that was pretty poor. But obviously I've just moved to Miami and I'm still very much like settling in, finding my feet, trying to make friends, having a social life for the first time in years, and obviously that is definitely impacting the amount of time that I can spend reading. So I guess it is to be expected while I'm still in this like settling in period and like assimilating myself into a new country and a new city and a new culture. But yeah, I do miss being able to give as much time as I used to reading, so I am trying this week to watch less Grey's Anatomy and spend more time with my books. But anyway, rambling aside, I read 6 books total in the month of September, which is pretty poor for me, but it's not like the end of the world, you know. I'm still going to hit my Goodreads reading target, so that is all that matters. And without further rambling, we're just going to get straight into the books that I was reading, and we're going to start with The Nanny by Lana Ferguson. So this is basically pitched as a very spicy rom-com. It's blurbed as Tessa Bailey meets Ali Hazelwood, and if you know me and my reading taste, you will know that those are 2 of my favourite rom-com authors. So I thought that this book was going to be just like a shoe-in for me. I thought it was going to be a definite 5 stars. I went into this expecting so much, and honestly I felt let down. I gave this 3 stars. I didn't hate it by any stretch of the imagination, but it just didn't do anything special for me. I wasn't sitting here reading it and falling in love with the characters or becoming obsessed with the story. I was just kind of like, okay. So this follows Cassie and Aiden, and Cassie is an ex-OnlyFans creator who has just found herself unemployed and is trying to decide whether or not to revive her old platform when she discovers an ad in the local paper for a nanny and just decides to apply for it, go for it, you know. So she turns up to the interview and meets Aiden, her ridiculously attractive boss, who may or may not be slightly familiar with Cassie already. And so basically the whole story kind of centers around them finding their feet around each other, living in the same house, and the hijinks that ensue. It is spicy. It's not the spiciest thing I've ever read though, so if you kind of have heard like, oh my god, this is so spicy about this book online, you may be in for a disappointment. If you're not that bothered, you may enjoy it more. I kind of really wanted a stupidly spicy read, to be honest, and that's why I feel, or one of the reasons why I feel like this just didn't work for me. But it wasn't bad, it just wasn't great, and I will not be reading it again. So that was like kind of an annoying way to start the month. Also, this took me like a week and a bit to read. Why? Then I read The Maddest Obsession on my Kindle by Danielle Laurie, which is book 2 in the Maid series, which is like a dark mafia romance. I actually gave this book 2 stars. I really struggled with this book. So I just don't think this series is for me, and like that's fine. I read the first one actually when I was in Mexico in 2021 when I had my really bad car accident, and I was reading it while I was recovering. And I really struggled to get into that first book. And I remember I filmed 2 reading vlogs while I was out there, and I think I only ended up posting 1 in the end. But I remember saying in that vlog quite often that I was just really struggling with the book and just not getting into it. And I think by the end of the book, I did kind of enjoy it. And it did mean that I kind of felt a little bit more excited to continue with the series. So I bought the other 2. And then I decided it was finally time to continue in September. I was just bitterly let down by it. I think mostly because book 2 doesn't follow the same characters as in book 1. So I didn't want to read about the characters in the second book. I just wanted to, you know, get back into the characters from the first book's like story. And I don't know. I just don't think this series is for me. And I like a mafia romance. I love a dark romance. We know this. I have no problem with any of those themes, anything like that. I just really dislike these books, but I have the 3rd one on my Kindle, so I do still need to read it at some point. I might try and just get through it this month if I'm having like a really good reading month and don't, you know, kind of let it go to hell before the end. Like if I have a week where I'm like, okay, I can take a week to read a book this week, like it doesn't matter, then I might just pick that up and just get it done. But my god, I hated that book so much. It was so bad. And you know what, like I can't even put my finger on why. I cannot sit here and say to you, it was bad because of this or this or this. I just objectively hated it. So that's my feeling on the Maddest Obsession. I don't recommend the series as a whole. But one book that I do recommend with every single fibre of my being is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I actually annotated this. This is the second time I've read it. I annotated this so much. It's got like post-its and everything in it. I kind of went completely feral with it. I loved this book so much. This was a 5 stars, in case you can't tell from the way I'm talking about it. And like I say, this was a reread. I read it for the first time in 2020, and I was worried that I wasn't going to love it as much the second time around, but I did. It was so good. And this is one, I think this kind of like sits on the same level as A Little Life for me, in that I find it incredibly harrowing and very triggering and very difficult to read, but I love it so much and I will never stop recommending it to people. Obviously, you do very much need to check the trigger warnings before you go into this, and I would definitely just go into it in a period of time when you're in a good mindset, because I think reading this when you're in a dark place as well definitely affects you more. It did for me the first time I read it, and this time I was able to kind of look past some of the things that really bothered me the first time. So this book is about Vanessa and her experiences with a relationship with a professor at her high school when she was in her very early teens. And as we kind of go through the book, we begin to see like how insidious and inappropriate this relationship was, and we learn a lot more about Vanessa and her life afterwards, and how this relationship has continued to impact her growing up. So when we join Vanessa at the beginning of the book, there's actually a sexual assault story in the press about this self-same professor, and so it's kind of like watching Vanessa learn and realize the effects of what he did to her as well, and like how that's affected her growing up. And it's like her healing journey and her like process of dealing with everything that she went through. So as you can imagine, this is very heavy. There are some very explicit scenes in this book that you really do need to be prepared for before you go into them. It makes you so angry, and it makes you so upset, and just so generally sickened by just the state of the world and rape culture in schools specifically, and just like how much of an effect that has on victims of abuse like the whole way through their lives. Like I say, I fully recommend picking this up, but going into it when you are in like the headspace to be able to deal with those themes, and also with the knowledge of what you're about to read, because this one, even when you're completely prepared, even me going into it as a reread, fully knowing what the book talks about and fully knowing what some of the scenes were, it still really got me, and I struggled, I really did. But it's so incredibly well written. It's amazing, and I fully feel like everybody should read this in the same way that I feel like everybody should read A Little Life. It's just honestly incredible, absolutely incredible. And sadly, there's parts of this, even though I have never had Vanessa's experience, obviously, of being groomed at school, I feel like there's elements of this book that are going to be relatable to every single woman. I certainly related to things like the dark blue tabs are things that I related to, and the purple tabs are things that made me angry, and I mean that's pretty much the entire book. So yes. Anyway, after that, I kind of had a complete 180 on the genre, and I felt like I was really in like a fantasy romance mood, so I picked up A Broken Blade by Melissa Blair. This one I think I gave 4 stars to. Let me check. Oh no, I gave this 3 stars. So this was like okay. It just took me longer than I expected to read, and it was quite slow going for me personally. I think just being in the reading mood I was in when I was reading this, but I do want to pick up the second book and see what happens, because it does leave it on quite like a cliffhanger. But this book is basically about our main character, Kira, who is an assassin for the king in this kingdom, and she is a half-blood, so she is half elf, half fae. Yes, half elf, half fae. And in this kingdom, the king hates the halflings, as they're called, and he either executes them or he makes them work for him. So she's kind of been trained up, and she is his like master assassin. So she ends up having to effectively end the lives of so many of her kin, and it really bothers her as she sees the state of the kingdom and the way that these other halflings are being treated. So one day when she is on a mission to catch the Shadow, who is giving the kingdom a lot of trouble, she actually journeys into Faeland, where she learns that everything is not quite as she suspects, and suddenly her loyalties are very much tested. I really enjoyed this. I went into it thinking it was going to be quite like Throne of Glass, with the kind of like half-blood, like assassin, fae, whatever vibes, and it wasn't. It was actually quite original in that respect, which I very much appreciated. And like I say, it ends on a cliffhanger where you're learning so much about Kira and her background and everything else, and that is also very, very interesting, and I think that is what is taking me to want to read the next book. The romance in this I found quite predictable. It's also very much a slow burn as well, and I think that's maybe another reason why this book just didn't kind of grasp me in the way that I wanted it to, because I'm not always a fan of a slow burn romance. I prefer things that happen not insta love, but just like a little bit quicker. But I did enjoy this, and I think it is worth picking up for sure. It was definitely the most like original fae fantasy romance that I've read in quite some time, and yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it's a duology rather than like a trilogy, so it's not too difficult to sink your teeth into either. Then we had a reread. I reread Icebreaker, which you guys probably already know is one of my favorite ever contemporary romances, and is my favorite ever sports romance. So like I say, this was a reread for me because Wildfire has just come out. I actually have that on my physical TBR for this month, and I'm so excited. So I did of course give this a 5 stars again because I just loved it so much. But if you're unfamiliar with this book, we have Anastasia and Nathan, and they both go to a university in California where they are both on like sports scholarships. So Nathan is a hockey player, ice hockey, and Anastasia is a figure skater, and she's trying to get to the Olympics. And there's 2 ice rinks at the school, so the teams like never really have to spend time together. So one day the hockey team's ice rink is really damaged, and they have to start sharing a rink with the figure skaters, which means that Nathan and Anastasia are kind of pitted against each other in this like rivalry to get access to the ice. But they slowly go from like enemies and rivals to lovers and stuff. It's so good. There's a lot more to it, but I really don't want to spoil it for you because I actually really enjoyed going into this the first time, not knowing a huge amount of about what it's about. I love this book so much. It is surprisingly spicy as well. When you look at the cover, you expect it to be quite innocent and cute and sweet, and it is very much not innocent, cute and sweet. Well, it is cute and sweet in places, but it's mostly very much not innocent, so just bear that in mind. But yeah, I really, really love this. I love the found family that these characters all have together. Their friendships are incredible. I love the dynamic between Nathan and Anastasia, and kind of like how healthy the topics of consent and communication are in this book. There is a lot of great representation and a lot of diversity as well amongst the characters, so I think that is another thing that is kind of worth celebrating for this author. And I will actually link the video where I read this for the first time as well, because that is one of my favorite vlogs that I filmed, I think last year. Was that this year? That might even have been earlier on this year, you know. I lose track. But yes, anyway, I love this book so much. I gave it 5 stars. I can't wait to read the second one, and I think you need to read this one too. And then finally, we actually have my favorite book of the month, which I really didn't think was going to be possible considering I had reread 2 of my previous favorites, but here we are. I read finally Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross, and you guys, oh my gosh. I read this in less than 24 hours, and this girl has been in the biggest reading slump as well the last few months. Less than 24 hours, I sailed through this. It was spectacular, and for the first time ever, I actually read along to like a playlist on Spotify. I found a Divine Rivals playlist, and it made it so much more atmospheric. Oh my gosh, I cried actual physical tears whilst reading this book. I lost my mind at parts of this book. I loved it so much. I wanted to annotate it halfway through. I was like, I should be annotating this, but I have this thing where I just don't like to annotate hardbacks. So I really do want to reread this when the paperback eventually comes out, so I can just like highlight all my favorite parts and like scribble over it and scream and cry and kick my silly little feet in the air, because I love this. I love this so much. It was so good. It lives up to the hype. It lives up to the hype. And this is another one I went into not really knowing what it's about. All I knew that it was a fantasy, there was romance involved, the gods were somehow interlinked, and there was a war, and I knew nothing else. And I feel like that's how you should go into it too, if you can avoid like learning too much about the plot, because just, oh my days, I think it made it more special. I loved it. I loved it. Iris and Roman honestly are like my favorites forever. 5 ever, not even 4 ever, like 5 ever. That's how much I loved them. And just the whole concept of the typewriters and the letters, and just like, oh my god, it was just so good. And the ending. Can we talk about the ending for a minute? Because I'm still not okay. I'm having problems, honestly, just like deep emotional trauma tied to that book. But that was my reading wrap up anyway for the month of September. Not my best, but we move on. It's a new month, it's a new start, it's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me. In essence, I read 6 books in the month of September. I am ashamed that it was so few, but there were 3 5-stars in that. So, I mean, it was a very mixed bag, but it was still a good bag. Just a small bag, smaller bag than usual. But yes, here are all the books that I read in the month of September. I hope you guys enjoyed my wrap up. I'm going to stop rambling now. I've forgotten how to end videos because I'm still woefully out of practice. So I will leave you to your day, night, whatever it may be, but I hope you're good. Subscribe if you're new. I'll see you in another one soon. Bye, friends.